Good evening. I'm Elaine Shanley, President of Anne Arundel Women Giving Together. Welcome to our 12th annual Women and Leadership Program. This evening's program is being sponsored by the Leadership Development and Nominating Committee. How appropriate, as this week is a week where we're celebrating women internationally. The Giving Circle is a group of over 230 women who over the past 15 years have raised and invested over $1.2 million with local charities. Working with trusted community nonprofits, the Giving Circle aims to improve the quality of life for women and families in Anne Arundel County. Tonight's event is one of several forums where members gather with community stakeholders to listen, learn, unlearn, and take action. Tonight, we are celebrating our 15th year of collective grant making. We would not be able to provide our educational programs without our sponsors. Their support is vital to us. Thanks to our leadership sponsors, One North Wealth Services, Sims and Campbell Estates and Trust, Annapolis Dermatology, and our advocate sponsors, Ellen Shirey, Sarah Greenlee Morris of Sotheby's International Realty, and Chesapeake Medical Imaging. For over 15 years, we have demonstrated the power of collective philanthropy by multiplying our annual $500 donation times 230 plus members to generate over $100,000 in grant funding yearly. Each year, additional dollars are added from the Giving Circle's endowment fund, and they're funneled directly into the grant pool. 10 years ago, an anonymous donor with a big vision donated $25,000 to start the Giving Circle's endowment fund. Today, we are pleased to announce the names of those visionary donors and invite them to tell us a little bit of their story. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our member, Eleanor Huggins, and her husband, David, as they share their stories in their own words.
Good evening. We are the Huggins, David and Eleanor.
I have been a member of Anne Arundel Women Giving Together since its founding in 2006. Back in October 2010, it was our privilege to donate the initial $25,000 that established the Giving Circle's Endowment Fund.
It was our hope that the fund would establish a permanent and sustained pool of endowed dollars, which could grow over the years and contribute to the grant work of the Giving Circle.
During the fund's first year, 49 AAWGT members came together to match our donation, thereby doubling the size of the endowment to $50,000. In the 9 years since, thanks to members' donations, memorial gifts, celebrations to mark birthdays, and other important events, and this year a bequest, more than 140 members have made endowment contributions. And as of today, AAWGT's endowment fund totals over $168,000. These funds in this year alone will generate over $5,000 in additional dollars for our 2021 grants.
We are delighted that our dreams have become a reality and that our initial $25,000 donation has been multiplied many times over to $168,000. Thanks to all of you. And we are pleased that, as we had hoped, the dollars spun off by the endowment into the grants fund has been significant. Over the 10 years of the fund's existence, this cumulative amount totals more than $32,000 in additional monies funneled directly into grants.
So, as we celebrate AAWGT's 15th year, anniversary year, we celebrate all that this fund has enabled. And we celebrate you who have supported it, and the people you have honored, and the events you have celebrated through your endowment gifts. David and I are so proud that together we all can contribute to make a difference in the lives of women and families in our community. Thank you, Anne Arundel Women Giving Together, and happy 15th birthday.
Thank you, Eleanor and David, for your inspiring words. I am joined tonight by tonight's moderator, Cardi Templeton. Many of you know Cardi as a local entrepreneur and co-owner for over 17 years of 222 Severn W&P Nautical, where she is responsible for asset management, leasing, and property management. Tonight, she will guide the panelists through a discussion of women in leadership and the necessity to ensure that they are not the last in such positions and what we can do to foster future female leaders. Cardi?
Thank you, Elaine. Good evening, and welcome to Women Leaders Fostering Change. Our panelists are national leaders in business, education, the arts, healthcare, medicine, the military, religion, and academia. Tonight's webinar is being recorded, and you may share it. It will be available on the givingtogether.org website under Event Resources. Our panelists would love to hear from you, so please submit your questions using your Zoom screen Q&A dialog box, which you are likely to find at the bottom of your screen if you're on a laptop. We will have a panel discussion and incorporate as many of your questions as possible. As I move towards introducing our three panelists, please know that their full bios are on givingtogether.org. These women have accomplished some incredible things. They have worked in amazing places. And my introduction tonight is only going to give you a sense of why they are our first choice panelists. And I know I'm looking forward to the discussion with them this evening, and I know you are too. Please meet Dr. Monica Jones. Our Giving Circle mission to improve lives of women and families matches Dr. Jones's responsibility for the entire system of care for women and children in the extensive Luminous Health Network. Dr. Jones's superior medical training and years of practice have particular focus on improved quality of women and children's health and service delivery. Welcome. Next, we get to be joined on the screen by retired Rear Admiral Margaret Kibben. Hello. From the church sanctuary to the battlefield and now to the U.S. House of Representatives, retired Rear Admiral Margaret Kibben calmly and effectively guides spirits and lives through prayer and policy, connecting with warriors, families, business people, professors, students, and congresspeople. A naval officer for over 30 years, she has more often than not been the only woman at the table. Picked by men to be the first female chaplain at the highest ranks and responsibilities in the Navy and Marine Corps, Chaplain Kibben has an uncanny ability to connect and be accepted by everyone. And now we get to have Linda Gooden join us too. And then there were four. Hello. In addition to being a board member of numerous Fortune 100 companies and chair of the University of Maryland Board of Regents, Linda Gooden's life is powered by STEAM, which you may know or may not as science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And that has threaded through her life from an early age. A recipient of virtually every National Business Leadership Award, this former Lockheed Martin corporate officer, at my bottom right, I don't know about your screen, has been a leader and corporate officer of over 30,000 technology professionals. And she has a passion for ballet, a special saxophonist, and computer engineer. So with that, hi everyone. Any thumbs up for sunshine and birds outside today? I hope we've all had a chance to enjoy the first day of what I hope will be many of spring. This evening, I'm hoping we're going to have a great conversation. I'm not hoping, I know we will. We've got some questions for the group writ large, and I would encourage interaction between all of you, and I'll certainly pipe in with some extra questions. Then we may have some questions for each of you individually, or we may at that point have audience questions depending on how much we've heard from you already. So with that, let me ask you each to take a couple of minutes, a minute or two, to tell us about a time in your careers a real turning point moment when somebody opened a door for you. And that door opening made a real difference in what you were able to accomplish at that particular place and time. And if you're able to, and you want the floor, let us know how that has changed how you have interacted with other women and opened doors for other women. I see, Linda, you are nodding. Do you want to start?
Sure. I thought about this, and the door I'll share actually came from an unlikely source, a very angry and disgruntled customer. A sister line of business at Lockheed was working on a software program for our DoD customer. The program was in a fair amount of trouble in terms of budget, schedule, functionality, and the customer wasn't happy. Although I only had a limited knowledge of the situation or the customer's temperament, I understood software. So I was asked to go to the Pentagon and brief the customer on the recovery plan. The customer was the Undersecretary for Command Control and Computing. Fortunately, once I found my way to his office, which is like finding your way through a maze in the Pentagon, it was a very good meeting. Instead of focusing on the program that was in trouble, he began a discussion with me on what my career plans were and what my goal was for the future. And I told him that I really wanted to establish an information line of business within the corporation. By the end of the meeting, he invited me to play golf that weekend to meet some of what would later become my industry peers. He introduced me to the leaders of the 3 largest information organizations and asked them to support me when asked. Over the next decade, he became a dear mentor and friend, and in fact, even came to work for us and helped me with my first acquisition. That one meeting opened many doors, and the subsequent relationships helped immensely with teaming, developing winning competitive strategies. It also taught me a lot about networking and building good customer relationships, which was a recurring theme throughout my career. I also learned why golf was such an important corporate skill. So you asked about today. Today, I always try to play it forward. When I mentor women, I always highlight the value of networking inside your organization and externally with industry peers. And when possible, I try to facilitate connections. I also encourage them to take prudent risks if they can see some potential returns that are beneficial to the business. I also encourage all my nieces and my daughter to take golf in college as their PE course, because someday it's going to come in handy.
Anyone else a golfer?
Not I.
Very little.
I'm not good.
That means you get to go next.
You don't have to be good.
Yeah.
You just have to play.
I was going to say, I don't have a handicap. So that should tell you everything.
I have one, but I'm not going to tell you online because this is being recorded.
No, I mean, those are all very sort of common themes, even in medicine, for example. I know that I was asked and honored. Thank you for this opportunity to speak among this incredible panel and to speak to all of you this evening. But my story is a little bit different, but yet a significant door was opened. I had the misfortune or fortune of not matching into gynecologic oncology the first time that I applied. And gynecologic oncology, for those that know, is a subspecialty of obstetrics and gynecology, and it is the most competitive subspecialty of gynecologic oncology. And my mentor from my residency program was not very connected in the field. And we do know that matters significantly, as Linda has eloquently shared. Nevertheless, I got some advice from my chair at the time. He said, you really need to find yourself at NIH, and why don't you do some research and go from there? And so that was his advice, just try to find somebody. So I looked and I found someone, Dr. Elise Cohn. She was running molecular therapeutics lab in the Laboratory of Pathology at the National Cancer Institute. And she actually had a postdoctoral research fellowship available. So I called her and I said, tell me more about this research fellowship. And it happened to be in ovarian cancer, which actually which is what really drew me to the field of gynecologic oncology. It is the most lethal gynecologic malignancy. And so I did want to understand more about the disease. But little did I know that I would learn how to be a basic science researcher, a molecular biologist, very early in my career. So the postdoctoral fellowship was 2 years, and I then was awarded a grant to study for 2 more years at NCI. So I did a total of 4 years of basic science research in her lab. I joined her lab with 1 abstract and left her lab with 10 manuscripts. And I had given my first international talk on the floor of the Nobel Forum. So had had the opportunity to speak among giants in the field of ovarian cancer. So that afforded me the opportunity to run my own basic science research lab at the Mayo Clinic. I landed a gynecologic oncology fellowship at the Mayo Clinic and stayed on staff there for 7 years. So couldn't have asked for a better start to a career, a better door that could have been opened. So how do I open doors? Well, during that 7 years that I had a basic science research lab, I invited young women into my lab to be postdoctoral fellows from all over the world. I had a fellow from Belgium. I had a fellow from Amsterdam. I had fellows from really all over the world. And it really is the most proudest part of my curriculum vitae is the mentorship section. Everyone should have a mentorship section on your curriculum vitae that outlines what the individuals that you have come into the closest contact with have accomplished. And I'm proud to say several are working in the public health and policy field. One that I recently invited to give grand rounds at our institution is now Director of Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Colorado and is an accomplished pediatrician. And so just there are a number of women that have benefited from 7 years that I had as a basic science researcher. So one door opened and a career in academia really was started there.
Thank you. Chaplain, we'd love to hear from you too.
Thank you. Well, good evening to all of you. And I pray that this is the hardest question on the entire evening, because I have had a great deal of difficulty with this one, because there hasn't been just one. There have been several. And the doors that have been opened haven't been clearly the door for the future, as my colleagues have identified, but rather, in my experience, throughout my tenure in the military, I have had a number of senior mentors to some extent, but senior officers, people who were commanding officers who had some sort of responsibility over me, who simply were open-minded. And in their open-mindedness, allowed me to flourish and gave me opportunities. That isn't to say that they didn't have some other paradigm in their mind when they met me. One of my first command chaplains said I was the same age as his daughter, and so I felt very parented upon occasion. And yet he was certainly open to allowing me to take some chances. He put me in some positions which were a stretch for me and allowed me to move forward into those. And I can say time and time again that happened throughout my 30 plus years on active duty. But what's interesting is, if I were to put one name to this, it actually was after I retired. So well into my career, and just only about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, I met a fellow from Annapolis. His name is John Bishop. He's a prince of a guy. And we just sat down and had coffee one day. And out of that conversation, I have met dozens of people I would never, ever have met, kind of breaking into this real world of civilian life. He really was the one that opened that door for me, because it really is such a foreign place. And I'm convinced that to some extent, and I can't tie the thread on this one, but to some extent, somehow my being here is somehow related to John. I don't think either one of us can put a finger on how that happened, but I just know that because I have met so many people along the way because of John, and only in the last 2 years, that's how I've been here. So to answer the second part of the question, especially with respect to my initial experience, or the bulk of my experience in the military, and that is, as a senior chaplain, a senior officer, I was always on the lookout for the people in my command, and to identify those who were different from the norm, if you will, and to figure out where their skill sets were. And the norm could be a personality type from a Myers-Briggs perspective. It could be race, it could be gender, it could be faith tradition, but to really to tap into the differences and find out how to help them to thrive, especially if their differences were so completely different from the norm. That how do we make sure that their voice doesn't get lost? And how do you leverage those particular skill sets or unique gifts and graces in such a way that everybody wins? And so that's how I've paid that forward.
Wow. The three of you are some real gifts to us this evening, but clearly to a lot of others, because you've received gifts and paid them forward. Thank you for sharing that with us. I really appreciate it. I would be remiss in noting that you haven't come across a lot of obstacles, and that I imagine a fair amount of grit has served you well. Certainly there's been a lot written about how grit is a necessity for lasting and impactful leadership. Do you agree that you have grit? How has it served you? Has it ever stood in your way? Where'd you get it? Talk to me about grit.
Well, I'd like to jump on that one first. If you see on my screen, my name is Margaret Grun Kibben. My maiden name is Grun. My dad used to say, you have to have Grun grit. That was a phrase in our home. You have to have Grun grit, which was essentially to say, if the cards are against you, you just power through. If it looks too overwhelming, you've just got to be able to grit your teeth and move forward. And Grun grit is a mantra for me. So yes, I think I have it in my DNA. I also have it in my upbringing. And I do think it's important because there are so many, I'll use the word voices again. There's so many voices that are counter to your desires or counter to your hopes for yourself, or even how you understand yourself to be, or where you see yourself going. There are so many voices that will say, yeah, no, not you, or worse than that. Or even your own interpretation of how things are that puts you down or holds you back. If you don't have grit to kind of push through that traction to just sort of say, no, I think I can try this. And when failing, if that happens, to be able to pick oneself up and move forward. I do think grit is important. And grit is an element of how one interacts with other people too, right? To be able to say, I have a voice and I want to use it. And that's a big part of how one makes it through life in general, but certainly how one learns how to lead and succeed.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I can't agree more with the chaplain. You know, it's interesting that she described her experience around grit starting in the family, and that has been my experience as well. I really do think birth order influences grit. I'm the youngest of 6. I had to fight for everything that I got as the youngest of 6. But I'll tell you what probably has given me the most grit are people that have told me that I couldn't do something. We talk about obstacles. I know that there's another question possibly related to that, or you alluded to that as well. You know, I'll never forget my sophomore year of undergrad when my advisor said to me, he said, you know, maybe you should think about dentistry, or maybe you should think about, now these are amazing professions, but he just really wanted me to not pursue medicine for a career, and really shared that with me. And this was my advisor. And I often wonder why he really thought I should do something else. But it was in him encouraging me to do something that he felt I couldn't do. It really gave me the desire to persevere even more in accomplishing it. So, and I can share with you countless stories of individuals saying, "Do you really want to do that?" And me saying, well, yeah. And that perseverance coming from the doubt that I could possibly accomplish it. I don't know. What do you think, Linda?
Well, I think I'm going to join the family connection for sure. And, I grew up with four brothers, and I was the youngest. And so if Dr. Brown refers to a birth order, I didn't have the birth order because I wasn't the oldest. And if you talk about your dad, my dad decided that he had five boys. And so because he told me much later in life, he said that the reason I wanted you to be tough is because I thought if my only girl cries, I'll probably cry too. So he said, so I figured we needed five guys in the family, five tough guys. And so I think I learned grit early on. I learned to hold my ground with all the guys and stand up for what I believed in. And I think, though, that when I think of it in a business context, I know that that helped me quite a bit. But I think from a business perspective, it was always my relentless passion around the power of computing. I believe that computers could make the world a better place. And from the very first day at the university, when I stood in front of that computer center and saw that computer, I was in awe of it. And since then, I've learned that it does have that power. So I believe I do have grit, but I must confess that, I've never been a total champion of kind of long-term goals. I prefer to set these incremental goals. And throughout my career, I've tried to sort of maintain agility and a learning mindset, which enabled me to transform and evolve my goals as the environment changed and the customer's needs changed, and more importantly, the technology changed. Most of the people on this call can remember a world before we had Alexa, before we had clouds, before we had tweets, before we had Netflix. I don't know how you'd go through COVID without Netflix, and even before an app store. So, now we can't imagine a world without them. And so those business opportunities, when you look at the world from a business perspective, didn't exist 10 years ago. So the only constant that we found in business was change. And so my initial goal was to start this line of business. We were going to leverage the Lockheed Martin brand. We were going to build software for all of the government customers so we could support the missions that weren't fulfilled by our planes and our bombs and our rockets. And it was a great idea. My boss was more practical. He told me I needed to make $23.9 million that year or abandon this notion. Fortunately, we did it. And he also said something that I thought was real important, and I think people should remember it. He always said that luck is not a strategy, but it certainly helps. And by staying focused on our markets and evolving our products and our offerings and supporting our customers, we were able to grow that into a $10 billion enterprise and do the things we wanted to do. And we were able to have a lot of fun along the way. So, my take is if you find your passion, you'll also find your grit.
That's true.
I also heard luck there, and I've heard family from all three of you. And I've also heard, or I haven't heard, messaging that girls often get, right? Around what's expected or what colors we might like or what professions we ought to go into. I'm not hearing that from the three of you. Did you not receive that growing up? Did you set it aside? Was that luck in the families you got? Tell me more about that.
Well, I think I did. I told you I grew up with four brothers, so we watched football, baseball, everything was a team sport. So I guess I didn't learn the girl things early on because there were so many boy things going on in my house. So I think that was fortunate. And I've said that many times because, in business, you find yourself, and I know we've all found ourselves many years, we were the only female in the room. And that was not an uncomfortable situation for me because that's the way I grew up. And so, so I think that in my case, the family was a real benefit, even though as a girl, as a little girl, I probably didn't think that. Because I remember one Christmas getting a doll and my brother got a race car, and I couldn't understand why I couldn't get a race car. And and my parents were really confused, like, why does she want a race car? And then 20 years later, I read a book that said Unlocking the Keys to the Clubhouse, right? And it was how to train your daughter to be an engineer, and it was to give her that race car. And I thought, wow, see, I was ahead of my time, and I was only 4.
How about you, Dr. Jones?
It was a couple things. It's a little bit straightforward for me in that, in terms of choosing a career. My father's a scientist, was a scientist, my mother a linguist. And so I was really drawn to both the science as well as the arts. We attended on a regular basis the opera with my mom. We the ballet. She was a huge fan of the arts. I enjoyed participating in musicals and have been in choirs and really struggled with should I be in music versus go into science, and I made that struggle reasonably early. And my dad sat me down one day and he said, Monica, musicians don't always know where their meals come from. And that's particularly if you're not, a hit. Yeah. He said a very small percentage of people make it to make it a lifelong career to be a musician. He said, you probably should stick with the science. And so I would find myself around he and his colleagues all the time, and just immersed myself into science and into medicine, and really found that to be my passion. In terms of luck, though, to answer the luck question, I do come from a family that is very has a strong faith. I have a brother that's a Roman Catholic priest. Very few people can say that are African American. I have, and he was actually ordained by our own Cardinal Gregory. So I have, my brother was a deacon, my father's a deacon. So much of who I am, I believe, is my faith. And I believe my work is my ministry. We didn't talk a lot about, in talking about leadership, we didn't talk a lot about what I do as a cancer specialist, but I believe that is my ministry and my calling. So much of who I am, certainly clinically, is because of my faith. Mm-hmm.
Well, I
Margaret,
think
you might have something to say
I
there.
might have something. I think you've tapped into something, and I see Linda nodding her head too in terms of having a strong faith. My family also very strong in the faith. I was raised in the Presbyterian Church. That's what my ordination is. And it was my youth group, really, my youth group pastor that called me, allowed me to see what my call was to ministry. But with respect to the question, in gender roles, that was never a thing in my house. I had an older sister, and my parents provided a lot of space for us to allow us to be who we were. Now, given that, my sister had learning disabilities, and so they spent a lot of energy on her part, which really gave me a lot of freedom to be who I am. And if I wanted to pursue something, that was great. If I didn't, that was fine too. I mean, I was in Girl Scouts and so forth, but I wanted to be in Boy Scouts too. I wanted to have both opportunities. I think really for me, it wasn't so much that I wanted one or the other. I wanted it all. Mm-hmm. And when I felt a call to ministry, nobody ever said, you can't do that. Even though in the Presbyterian Church, they'd only been ordaining women for about 10 years at that point. Nobody brought that up. Like, oh my gosh, that's just going to be insurmountable. There's no way you can do that. Why would you? How did that even come to your mind? Nobody ever, not my parents, not my church, nobody. So frankly, the obstacles with respect to gender, likewise, the norms weren't really there. I did go, ironically, I went to an all women's college. Mm-hmm. And I went to Goucher, just up the street from all of you. And but I found myself going there for two reasons. One was sort of noble and the other one was not. The not reason was is that my high school boyfriend was off to the Naval Academy. So what was the closest school to the Naval Academy that I could go to, and I couldn't be a Johnny. So I didn't have the brains, but I could go to Goucher. But then I realized, and after that broke up, now I had to go to Goucher because I couldn't tell my parents the real reason I wanted to go there. But when I was there, I realized one of the things I liked guys. I think guys are pretty awesome, but I would find myself as a teenager sort of subduing myself in order to perpetuate a relationship or to look better in a guy's eyes. I didn't have the brothers to kind of help me shape who I am in the gender relationship piece. And so for me, going to an all women's college also gave me a lot of space to discover who I am and what I wanted to do. I didn't have to play that game except on the weekends when the midshipmen came up for visits.
There are so many things that I would like to talk to each of you about. But this is not all about me, so I will contain myself and remind us that one of the reasons that we are here this evening, in addition to your amazing leadership, is that we are little boxes because we are in a pandemic. And we are on Zoom and we are not in person in the way we normally would be. And it has been quite a year. It has been a year where I no doubt you all have had to exhibit enormous leadership. Dr. Jones, you in particular, in ways that probably none of us can thank you enough for. And Chaplain, you have had your version of that in the last weeks and months. And Linda, I cannot imagine, but I hope you retired beforehand. Otherwise, you were transitioning 30,000 people to going online from home and not going bonkers. It has been a year for women in the workplace. It has been a year for mothers, working mothers in particular. Our current Vice President Harris called it a national emergency that 2.5 million women have left the workforce. Is that how you see it? Do you see it as an emergency? Do you worry about that? How is it full of opportunity? Is this a change and a shift in the environment that Linda, you were talking about, that we can all be agile about and find the positives in?
Well, I think that for sure there will be some good that will come out of it. Mm-hmm. But I read an article in the Baltimore Sun a couple weeks ago. And I guess I should have known this, but I didn't, that 2/3 of women are the primary earners for households. Mm-hmm. And when you think about that and you think about the COVID job loss, when I heard Vice President Harris talk about the 2.5 million women, and then you couple that with the fact that 2/3 of the women are the primary earners, and you realize that many of those women live at or near the poverty line, and they work in jobs in health and hospitality, healthcare at the lower ends and hospitality. You start to think about the fact that, there are so many programs that we probably don't pay as much attention to as we should. Years ago, I had an employee come to me and explain that she really needed some time off because she had a child that was special needs and needed some extra time. And we worked out something in the 90s, before it was popular, where she could work part of the time at home and part of the time at work to help her with that. But now you really start to think how important it is to have things like family leave, to have childcare, to have healthcare, to have things that you probably didn't think as much about before this crisis. I think from a business perspective, what we're finding is that people are extremely productive working from home. And especially in large urban areas where they don't have to get dressed, they don't have to sit in traffic for 2 hours, and they can really focus on the work. And so it hasn't been so bad for business and large corporations. But when you think about the damage to families who work in a lot of the service industry, then you say, we really need to do more to help women who work. And I know, Dr. Brown, you see this firsthand all the time. And so I will defer to you on what we really should be doing to actually try and make things better from where we sit.
No, I can't, I can't agree more. The data are incredibly staggering, right? I mean, the job loss rate is twice that of men. We have women in the workforce at a approximately 57% rate, which is what it was in 1988. We have really 40% of women over the age of 20 that have been out of work for 6 months or longer, right? So these are pretty incredible statistics that this pandemic have brought to us. And so we could I could see the language of crisis being used, but then we hear the stories of women like, I too are reading the story, interesting, of a woman, Lizette Cortez in Texas. She worked for a large immigration firm that their numbers had decreased because of everything going on with immigration amid COVID and before. And she ended up starting her own immigration firm, hired her mom, something she dreamt of doing, but then really got the opportunity to do because of COVID. In medicine, for example, we have had to flex to telemedicine visits. And we found a couple things. We found that our patient satisfaction with telemedicine is actually not so bad at all. There are a lot of people that don't want to get in their car and drive and sit and wait in a waiting room just because they really want to get taken care of, in a telemedicine platform. And so what it's done for women in medicine, it's allowed them to have a lot of flexibility in how they manage their calendar. So we've seen some job satisfaction come through the telemedicine platform. And I'll tell you, that is not going away. We are going to have telemedicine for some time. And then finally, look at what our teachers have done. I can't be more proud of my daughter's teachers, of the teaching community. I mean, we have asked them to flex fast to a digital platform to educate our children. And one of my dear friends was telling the story of her daughter, who's a brand new teacher, who was ready to start these new teaching strategies. And then COVID hit and she's like, oh my gosh, I've got to make this all digital. But it brought out creativity, it brought out innovation, and it really helped her to even help some of the older teachers at her school to flex to a digital platform. So I see this making women stronger, more innovative, more creative. And with those tools, we are going to get back into the workforce and be better for it.
I think both of you have touched on some really fascinating points. And oh, by the way, Dr. Jones, my daughter is a first-year teacher and has found her, it sounded like I had talked to you about her because she's incredibly creative and has also been able to help out some of the older teachers who do not have the flexibility with respect to computers and IT and so forth. But that being said, in addition to what you've said, this isn't contradictory at all, and certainly the national crisis withstanding, one of the things I find in this conversation among women are that, particularly military women as example, because they're the ones I know the most, the best, there's a lot of guilt for working. There's a lot of guilt for deploying. And in their case, obviously they've had to stay in the military, but I would imagine that there are other women outside the military workforce who feel like, oh, finally I can stay at home and be with my kids and it's okay. And to be able to raise your kids at a very critical time in their lives and to be with them. And one of the things I heard early on in COVID is that, what we'll remember is the crisis. What kids will remember is the time they got to spend with mom and dad. And how we got to have, we could play in the backyard on a school day. So there's so much that can come from this, but I think we also have to keep in mind that as you were both hinting at, are there paradigm shifts that we can make that enable people, men and women, to discover what this work-life balance is all about? Have we gotten to a point where we no longer feel like work is the be all and end all of success, but that in fact a balanced life is perhaps where we should be centering ourselves in on, and how did we learn to do that in this last year?
And I think the millennials and Generation Z for sure are more focused on work-life balance than perhaps we were. Well, I know than we were. And so I think that this has opened the door for many of us that they have been trying to tell us for a while. You know, my daughter's 30 and she definitely thinks that there should be more to life than work. And I hear that from, you know, all my nieces as well. And so I think this generation does want some balance in their life. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing, because I think it makes them better employees when they're when they are working.
You all have unwittingly and graciously given me a great lead in to what needs to be our conclusion, because time has sped by as we've been listening to you. Would you each take a couple of minutes to share your vision for how women's leadership should change, shift, or evolve over the next 10 years? And how we as an audience of women who are obviously either part of the giving group or interested in the giving group and in women's leadership, how we can support women around us. Every woman around us is a leader in some portion of her life or in maybe many portions. So what can we take from your thoughts this evening, this year of transition? How do you see women's leadership evolving, and how can we support that?
Well, I guess I can start. One of the things that I think we just ended with are the differences in the generations. And, you know, there's been many studies done on women's leadership styles, being more mentoring, more coaching, whereas men's styles are more command and control. As we see these new generations coming into the workforce and becoming a bigger and bigger part of it, I think that a woman's style is going to lend itself to success, because these generations are looking for that style of leadership. And it's probably more important now than it was 10 or 20 years ago. Women also tend to be more inclusive and more collaborative. And it's nothing negative about men. It's just the way we're made up. And there's a great book out by a gentleman named Ram Charan, I think his name is. I'd have to look it up. But it talks a lot about how boards can deliver by adding more female representation on boards, because we look at things differently. And we just talked about the fact that, you know, half of the workforce is women. Women are making more and more buying decisions. Women are shareholders and stockholders just like guys are. And so there are so many reasons why this should be the age of the woman, because the skills, the temperament, and our leadership styles just lend themselves to this time.
Yeah, I can't agree more, Linda. We know that just with a diverse workforce, you do see not just diversity in necessarily in gender, but diversity in thought. And with that, obviously comes more problem solving, more to really significant challenges, which we are obviously facing here and now. Interestingly, even in my own organization, we've had a lot of women come forward and really make significant contributions to the management of this pandemic in a way that we probably wouldn't have thought of had we not had it. So definitely having their presence there. And then when you have one, it really inspires others to come along. It inspires people to say, this is an organization that clearly values diversity, and therefore you can recruit higher caliber individuals or individuals that value diversity as well. We do know that women have, at certain levels in any industry, have been outsiders in many ways. And so they really are able to come into an environment and hit the ground running because they know what it's like to try to pull all the tools together to make something work. So I really do see us coming above and out of this in a way that is incredibly positive, incredibly engaging, and I'm highly optimistic for that.
So I certainly would want to underscore everything that both women have already said, but I'd like to take it from a slightly different angle. And I think it's not a gender issue necessarily. I think everybody needs to have some sense of what leader development is. Mm-hmm. We have socialized. I think the fact that men can grow as leaders more comfortably than mm-hmm. women can. But I think the overall piece of leader development is finding your voice. Mm-hmm. And what that is to say is that who are you and what is your skill set? And when Dr. Jones was talking about going into seeing her guidance counselor in college, and he said, you should do this, but her voice said, no, I should do that. That I think is part of leader development, is giving people space to discover who they are and to be able to have sounding boards that challenge that, certainly, but also encourage that and help them to grow. Now we're back to the mentorship piece that Linda was talking about earlier. But with leader development, it's finding your voice. And then the second part of that is using your voice. Mm-hmm. And if that's where we have fallen short with respect to growing women as leaders, then that's an area that we really need to consider. How do you use your voice? And we've talked about how women are so collaborative and we create networks and so forth, but oftentimes that's to the neglect of our own voice. If I can get somebody else to talk, then I don't have to. And so with respect to growing women as leaders, it's helping them to feel comfortable to use their voice and to step it out, so that you're not just waiting for the other person. Go ahead. No, you go first. That's very nice. It's very polite. And I'm not saying that we should, be impolite as a society, certainly. But what I am saying is that why is anyone afraid to use their voice? And if we as a community can say, well, our system or our community or our culture is squelching voices or is not interested in hearing a variety of voices, then that's how we can, as an organization, can work to make that change. And that enables all people, to be able to grow and find and use their voice.
How can we help people, women, all people find their voice, know their inner desires, right? And their skill sets. When so many people are going to be coming out of this pandemic in a really tough financial position. Dr. Jones mentioned some statistics earlier about how many people are struggling financially. And how can we help there? How do we enable, support, listen, hear when people are struggling just to figure out what to have for dinner and get the kids' homework done and get some sleep before they get up and start their first or second job, hopefully?
Well, it's certainly the communities are not new. We've been, it takes a village to raise a child, to raise a leader. And I think we as communities need to find ways to circle each other with support systems and that are out there and to create opportunities for people to talk. And you kind of zeroed in on the working mom piece. Well, are there Mom's Day Out opportunities that then the moms can then not just get their chores done, but that they can also go to a creative thought circle or something where that they can, I'm thinking about a book writers club or something to the equal of that with respect to STEAM. Are there areas where we can create opportunities for people to bounce ideas off each other and to grow and discover who they are? I think just because you're a working mom doesn't mean you have to squelch your creativity, but I think maybe as a community, we need to create those opportunities for creation.
I think the other thing, one of the things we're working on with the University System of Maryland is to make sure that education is accessible and affordable, so that for these young mothers who do want to go and get another credential, that they don't necessarily have to get a degree. They can get a credential that allows them to get into a better paying job. And making that easier in terms of online accessibility, making it affordable in terms of financial aid, and making sure that people know that it is accessible to them. So I think there are many different paths that you can take to lift people up. And education is certainly one that has helped many of us improve our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I can't agree more. I can't agree more with that. I think in medicine, what we're certainly seeing as an output of this, and where I think many of our solutions will lie, is and will engage a lot of women from diverse backgrounds, is as we think of caring for individuals that are that have really experienced or experiencing a recession, are experiencing significant financial distress. We know that this epidemic has brought out and has increased our awareness of significant disparities in care. And so how are we going to approach patients that are in this space as a health system? And what we're doing is we want to look at engaging multidisciplinary teams to provide the care. When you engage a multidisciplinary team of a physician, a staff member, a process improvement team member, a data analytics person, when you engage a multidisciplinary team to take care of patients, then everybody recognizes that their voice is important. And so the more you engage individuals around the fact that they're important and that they're part of the solution, you'll get more folks engaged in the solution. The other thing we're doing also in medicine is starting to look at illness, not just as the illness that this patient is bringing to us, but what are some of those social determinants of health that we might be addressing first and foremost for this individual that's coming to us in a recession, unemployed, et cetera. How can we address those first and then, or at least in parallel with their illness? So it's really a recognition that you're not just bringing your illness to us, but you're bringing a complete person, and we're going to try to address all of those things.
We do have some audience questions, and we have a little bit of time for audience questions. On a slightly different topic, one of our audience members asks, even with your amazing successes as leaders, I'm sure there have been a few moments of self-doubt. How have you overcome those moments?
Okay, I'm willing to start. I thought that the question was really kind to say a few moments of self-doubt. And so I think that that we all have had many moments of self-doubt. But I think that the key for me is to have myself surrounded with a good team. I think that too often we think the leader has to know everything and be everything, but a leader is one person, and it takes a whole team many times to get things done. Mm-hmm. And I very purposefully put together a team of people who weren't just going to agree with me, who would push back on the decisions, who would say, you know, did we think of this or did we think of that? And so it was a good way to have kind of a check and balance right there on the team for those issues. The other area that I strongly encourage is mentors. And throughout life, I've always had mentors. And having someone that you feel comfortable that you can go and say, what do you think? Just as an outside opinion is so important. And particularly people who you know will play it straight and won't necessarily just tell you what you want to hear. And being able to accept that feedback it improves the decision making and gives you a way to move forward, I think. So those are kind of the tools that I used.
I agree with everything she just said. I think that's that building a team is so critical, and to create an environment where the team feels comfortable to say that the emperor has no clothes. I think that's so important. But I also think, and this kind of goes back to what we all said, is that faith matters. And okay, yeah, I'm the chaplain, you expect me to say this, so I will. But faith matters. And honestly, if one feels called to what one is doing, motherhood, being a doctor, being a chaplain, being an executive, if I feel that God has called me here, then I also must believe that he's going to equip me. So the doubt comes from within me. It doesn't come as something that invalidates my call. It's only as so many other people have been called. If you go into scripture, who me? You want me? And Moses, Isaiah, Jeremiah, you pick one. They've all had this sense of, wow, I'm not sure I am able. And honestly, I am not able. I am able when I realize that I am actually an instrument of how God has chosen to use me. And that's my statement of faith. And that is what has carried me through those moments of several moments of self-doubt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I was reading a recent article in the Harvard Business Review on the imposter syndrome.
Yes.
Because somebody had given me shared with me, oh, well, that time in your life when you doubted yourself as a really highly achieving individual is maybe an example of imposter syndrome. So where you doubt that you're really where you should be, or that you really accomplished something you really did. And this particular author in this article last month said, should we be really thinking of imposter syndrome really from the environment that's been created? So Linda speaks of mentors, the chaplain speaks of the calling. I mean, is it really an environment that we need to be seeing ourselves operating in, and rather than us being this person that really we can't believe we've accomplished it, if you will. So it really, this author really challenges to say, look at our environment, look at what is telling us that we can't accomplish something, and really stand on the fact that you've clearly gotten to where you are for a reason, and to really stand on that and be confident of that. The other thing, Linda, I know we've heard, I can't remember the person that did the TED Talk, but mentorship, I've had amazing mentors. I have mentors that I've been able to call on the phone and say, have you ever been in this situation? And they say, yes. And this is what I did. Right. But you have those folks, right? But then you also have sponsors. I mean, I think Elise was a sponsor for me. I think I've had surgeons in my life that have really sponsored me and went in front of me and said, this is a person that is reliable. She's a person that will get done what you need to get done. You can hang your hat on what she has to deliver. It's those people that I sort of feel like that have been instrumental too in my life, those sponsors that actually put me forward to other individuals of influence.
Another question, and this is, how can veteran women collaborate with non-veteran women to support each other?
I think we're doing it right now. I think this is part of it. But I saw that question on the Q&A and I thought, oh, that's an interesting question. And I'm not really sure what you're trying to tease out, except that once again, it comes down to, what's your story? And what have you learned from your journey? And how do we share that with each other? I'm looking here at Linda, an accomplished executive, and the stories that she has are just amazing. They're different from mine. And the same for Dr. Jones. Amazing backgrounds. What can we learn from one another? And I think your network is an exact example of how that plays out. And do veteran women bring anything different to the table? Well, experientially, surely. But I don't know that we're really that much different from the two people we're sharing the panel. I'm sharing the panel with right now, and you, Cardi. I don't know you at all, but I'm why couldn't we have this conversation to say, how do we build one another up?
Mm-hmm. Which circles back to the thought of creative community, creative opportunities beyond our jobs or beyond our family raising or our households, right? Right. And raising each other up there and having those creative spaces, be they educational or otherwise, and technology that can help us do that, right? As we come out of this year of health crisis, which has led to many other crises and some amazing changes and opportunities, how can we reconnect? How can we've all been physically isolated, many of us, from each other, right? We have all had stresses and strains that have probably changed our chemistry in our brains, right? We have faced things and losses of every sort. How can we get from where we are now over the next couple of years to reconnecting, to re-supporting each other in physical connection, in physical community? How do you see that path happening? I mean, that's partly a health question, it's partly a sociological, partly a psychological question. Technology has been super amazing through this, right? We don't want to lose that because it allows us to connect with people who aren't right beside us.
You know, recently I was talking to one of my brothers who said that we had been closer through COVID than we had been probably in the last 10 or 15 years. Because once or twice a month, we got on the phone as a family and talked on Zoom. And the technology enabled us to stay in touch in ways that we didn't make time before because we were all off busy, living our lives. And so I think that getting back to physical contact has pluses and minuses. I think that COVID in many ways taught us to appreciate the value of life. And it taught us how important it is to reach out and touch someone when there was a real fear that something could happen to that person and they might not be there to see you the next time. And so I think that I think the technology enabled us to get close in many ways, and that the physical closeness and getting back to, getting on planes and me putting on high heels again and all that, I can tell you, I'm excited about it. I've kind of gotten used to this life. It's not a bad life, I don't want people to be sick or die, but I do like the fact that we do care, I think, a lot more about people and what's happening with people than I think we did pre-COVID, because we just all imagined we'd be here tomorrow and we could chat about it tomorrow.
That's true. I think whenever you go through, whenever you go through an experience where there's a common enemy, right? And you've sort of had to you've had to change, you've had to band together and to manage a common threat, if you will. It really brings folks together. We tend to find our common ground just a little bit easier than we would have otherwise. And so I think coming out of this, we're going to seek to find common ground. And I think that is going to really create those connections that you're speaking of, Cardi.
And maybe, Chaplain, we'll go back to church. For those of us who have had a habit of that, maybe we'll be able to do that again.
And community is important to us. It's part of it's part of who we are as human beings. We need that community. We need the touch, we need the interaction, we need the opportunity to love on each other. That is so critical to just human flourishing that I do think that that's something that we've come to appreciate even more. But I think that that's what we're going to celebrate that when we have that opportunity. The image I've often used with respect to COVID is it's a lot like a forest fire. A forest fire is horribly devastating. There's no doubt about it. It's destructive. But as a result of a forest fire, certain plants are now allowed to grow. And it isn't just that now they have sunlight. There's actually plants that need the fire and the residue of the fire, the ashes and the minerals and so forth that come following a fire. They need those to be able to grow. And based on what has already been said, that's exactly what's going to happen. We're going to discover things that we didn't know before because we've had this incredible experience and have, you know, out of the ashes will come some incredible growth.
Great.
Any closing thoughts each of you might like to share? Something you hope we, as a community or individuals, will talk some more about around our own family dinner tables or work office conference room tables. What do you want us to mull on some more from this evening's wonderful conversation?
I'm really fond of a Confucius phrase. So it's an old one. It says, you know, he said, find something you love and you'll never work a day in your life. You know, my advice is to seek your passion, whatever your passion is. Find your grit, and your ability to accomplish your goals will come naturally. And remember, you know, no one gets to a higher position in life without the help of others. So don't just seek help. Always remember to give help. So, you know, I love to say, you know, play it forward, because we all got here because someone helped us, whether it's a sponsor or a mentor or our religious backgrounds or just having strong, nurturing parents. We're here because of others. We stand on the shoulders of giants. And so it's so important that the listeners also not only seek help, but give help.
I was just really struck in this conversation by really all of these amazing women. But I think the chaplain, when you use the word finding your voice and using your voice, it struck me considerably in a number of ways. One, I do have a team of leaders that I work with every single day, and we do leadership development exercises, and we have actually leadership retreats and faculty development retreats and do this. But those words really come down to really key leadership tenets, right? If you're finding your voice, that means you're self-aware. And that is a critical tenet of leadership and a critical leadership competency, being really and truly aware of oneself, one's strengths, one's weaknesses, being emotionally intelligent, if you will. But then also using your voice. That is really communication. And you can almost use your voice in ways that are even nonverbal. And it's often sometimes engaging others and sharing their voice and their story. So those are things that I've walked away with from this conversation that I'm going to bring to my leaders and really help to encourage them and develop in that space. So thank you for all of you for sharing the evening, and thank you for your words of encouragement.
Well, and I thank you too. And if I had words of advice, I would say that if you're ever going to sit on a panel, make sure that Dr. Jones and Linda Gooden are on it too, so that after you wait until they speak and you can say ditto. But both of you had some wonderfully wise words, and I think that's so critical to this organization. But there's another little phrase I often use too, and it's related to finding your voice, but it's leaders lead. And I think oftentimes we find ourselves in leadership positions and we don't take the step. We don't lean into the responsibility that we have. And one of the things I have found, and maybe it's because I'm often the one of, and I don't mean the one woman, I mean the one pastor or the one chaplain or the one senior officer. But people are waiting for you to speak. They're waiting for you to use this breadth of knowledge and experience that you have. They want you to use your character. They want you to use all those gifts that you had. They're just waiting for you to do it. So do it. You know, leaders lead, and you have it, you own it, and it's been given to you. And so the best way you can celebrate who you are is to be you.
I am so grateful for this evening and that it's been recorded so that I can share it with my daughter, something we all have in common. And we can replay it in a couple of years. She's only 7, not too young, but let's replay it when she's 10 and 13 and 16 and 19, at which point I will let her watch it without watching me. Thank you all so much. And Elaine, I think you may have some words for us.
Thank you.
Ditto. Thank you all. Ditto. I can't wait to share this all with my teenager girls. Oh, wow. Just to our amazing panelists, Dr. Monica Jones, Linda Gooden, and Chaplain Margaret Kibben. Thank you for your time and an insightful, inspiring, and thought-provoking conversation. There was so much to take away from tonight. I'd also like to thank our web IT hosts, Cheryl and Chantel of Civility Management Solutions. And also to our viewers, thank you for tuning in. And we can't wait to share more of this recording, and just give.org. Thank you very much and have a good evening.